I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Dr. Pedersen?
Present.
Commissioner Sanfilippo?
Present.
Commissioner Divney? Vice Chair Marsters?
Present.
Chair Clapper?
Present. Public comment. Public comment is limited to items not on the agenda. The Commission may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed by the Brown Act, Government Code Section 54954.2. However, the Commission's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or have a matter placed on a future Commission agenda for a more comprehensive action or report. Is there anyone here who wanted to speak about anything not on tonight's agenda?
The agenda's over there.
It's about the agenda, okay. Okay. Thank you. Now, approval of the minutes for January 28th meeting, please. Any comments? January 25th, I'm sorry. Didn't put my reading glasses on.
Yeah, there's a comment here that says what was going to happen. I think it should be happen. I believe that's what it should say.
Catch, although I like the idea of putting more happy in our meetings. But,
Yeah.
okay, yes.
Get that.
Commissioner Marsters?
I have one more change, and that is under Commissioner Marsters, he stated that he believes Cherry Walnut to be a dangerous intersection. Let's say difficult intersection. I don't necessarily want to claim that it's a dangerous intersection.
Okay. Commissioner Divney, did you have a comment about the...
No. With no further
Everyone?
difficulties,
Okay.
I'll happily move with those two changes to approve.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? No? Okay, thank you. Public hearing. Procedure for public hearing. Staff will present a report on the history, physical features, etc. on the application, followed with the staff's recommendations. The applicant will make a presentation. Thereafter, interested members of the community may speak on the proposal. When all interested parties have had an opportunity to be heard, the hearing will be closed and no further discussion from the floor can be held. The Commission will then consider the evidence and make its recommendation. If you challenge a public hearing item in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing described in this notice, the public notice, or in written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. Speakers should fill out a speaker's form found by the door and hand it to the recording secretary prior to addressing the Commission. The speaker should come up to the microphone to speak since the meeting is being recorded. This will assist staff in preparing the minutes. Item number A, study session on the Wheeler Plaza Development Draft Environmental Impact Report. Staff report, please.
Thank you. Good evening. As you recall, this study session is a continuation of the study session you conducted at your last Planning Commission meeting, and at that time it was a joint study session with the Transportation and Circulation Commission. At that meeting, you reviewed the project overview as well as the traffic and circulation chapter of the Draft Environmental Impact Report for the Wheeler Plaza development. At that meeting, we continued it to complete your review of the Wheeler Draft Environmental Impact Report. I do have the full presentation that we gave at the last meeting, so I'll just zip through that. For tonight, we'd like you to open the study session, review the remaining chapters of the draft EIR, have some questions and answers with our consultant, take public comment, and then provide us any commissioner input that you have. You recall the location of Wheeler Plaza here, which is in the core of our downtown. Just the zoomed-in view of Wheeler Plaza, San Carlos Avenue, Laurel Street. This is the former Foodville Market. The proposed project does consist of 108 dwelling units with 190 below-grade parking spaces, and there would be just under 10,000 square foot of new retail on San Carlos Avenue, 9,000 square foot restaurant space on Laurel Street. Also on Laurel Street would be a 6,500 square foot public space and a new public parking plaza, new structure with 237 parking spaces. That's 50 net new parking spaces over the current condition. This shows you the basement level. Again, this would be parking just for the residents above. The at-grade parking structure showing you the access here on Walnut Street, the pathways through where you're able to connect to the businesses on Laurel Street. And then the second level, this again is the public parking level. And then this is the third and fourth floors of the residential. And finally, the top level of residential, and as you noted, is pulled back on San Carlos Avenue. The building sections we discussed at the last meeting. And this is then, the conceptual level design that we have at the corner of San Carlos Avenue and Walnut Street. And you see here, this is the two-story parking structure, the housing units above, and then the new commercial space. Another view along Walnut Street. We discussed a little bit the pedestrian connectivity, showing you how you can get through from Laurel to Walnut, and then again it connects all the way through to City Hall. And then we also discussed the new public plaza opportunity that hopefully a new restaurant would be able to open into. And then a view of that public plaza. And then Rebecca Gorton reviewed the purpose and intent of CEQA, what the items are that we cover, went through the process. We did sent out the scoping notice. We've had several community meetings to discuss the environmental impacts. And right now we have the public comment period on the draft environmental impact report is actually closed. So we've received all those comments and we're working on the response to comments and then putting that together for the final document that will come back to you as well as the City Council. And this was the traffic section, and I'll just get us back to where, Rebecca, where we need to start off.
This is great.
Right here. Okay, so now I'll introduce Rebecca Gorton with Lanphier Gregory, and she's the project manager.
Good evening. So my purpose here today is to summarize the analysis and conclusions in the draft EIR for you. And if you have any questions regarding the content or the implications of that draft, hopefully I'll be able to answer those today. If any of your concerns go above and beyond the draft EIR, we'll probably collect those comments and then respond in the final EIR with the other comments that we've received. So we did a full analysis of this project, all the topic areas under CEQA. We didn't screen any out beforehand. This involved quite a bit of analysis. We had a visual modeler in to do massing simulations. We did emissions modeling for criteria air pollutants and greenhouse gases using the Air District's recommended methodologies. We did biological survey, including having an arborist come and survey the trees on site. We did a cultural assessment and had a historic architect come and take a look at the buildings that will be removed, since many of them are older than 50 years, which is considered a historic age. We had noise specialists, engineers come out and do some monitoring of the noise environment and modeling of what it would be in the future. We did traffic counts, parking surveys, and modeling of traffic, which we talked about previously. And we had certified engineers do technical review of the reports and plans related to geology, hydrology, hazardous materials, and utilities. And for other topic areas, did review against relevant plans, policies, and regulations. Through that analysis, we found 17 potentially significant impacts, and we were able to reduce all of them to a less than significant level through mitigation measures. We did not find any significant and unavoidable impacts following mitigation, and all the other impacts were less than significant. So I'm going to run through these mitigation measures, the impacts and mitigation measures. The majority of the impacts were related to the construction period. Construction itself does have an impact. Again, they were all mitigated, but let me run through them very quickly. We had air quality, construction period emissions, and exposure of nearby sensitive receptors. That was mitigated through best management practices that would reduce diesel exhaust and fugitive dust emissions. For biology, we identified impacts related to the removal of trees and the possibility of nesting birds in those trees. That was mitigated through requiring nesting surveys right before construction happens to make sure that birds have not come and nested, since we took a look at that. And appropriate tree removal permits and replacement, which are included in the plan. For cultural, it's pretty standard to, even though we didn't find any evidence that there would be cultural resources on the site and the buildings were not found to be historic resources, We've included standard construction management that would halt activity in the event that resources are discovered during excavation. Geology and hydrology have related impacts related to construction period erosion and siltation during grading and excavation activities. That's mitigated through, again, standard pollution prevention plans for stormwater during the construction period. Hazardous materials, because there are older buildings on the site, those buildings might contain hazardous materials such as lead-based paint and asbestos. Some of that has been surveyed already, some of it has not, depending on the building. So we've mitigated it to require that all the buildings are surveyed before they are removed and that any hazardous materials found would be handled appropriately. Also, there's a dry cleaner on site that had a release of PCE previously. It's an identified release that happened on the site. It is in the process of being fully characterized, and it will probably continue to be until they've removed the building on top of it and gotten down to the soil where they can really take a look at it. So our mitigation is to continue that characterization and treat it appropriately during the construction period. So remove it and dispose of it as appropriate if it is still contaminated. And finally, noise. There would be noise during the construction period as well as vibration. We've mitigated that through noise reduction measures and a vibration monitoring plan. So 5, kind of plus 1, of the mitigation measures relate to the operations of the project. So after the construction period, there would be some impacts that we've mitigated. I'll run through those quickly. The top one is geology. We do live in a seismically active region, so it's just compliance with applicable regulations and structural design level plans. Pretty standard, but we wanted to make sure to include that. For hazardous materials, again, this is the plus 1. That PCE release, depending on what they find when they get into the soil, might require vapor barriers or vapor extraction in the buildings that you build afterwards. So we've included that here. For noise, because you would be increasing the level of traffic in the area, you would be increasing to some degree the ambient noise in the area. Also, some of the buildings would have mechanical equipment on top, and that mechanical equipment, if not properly screened, would increase the ambient noise. So we've required design level acoustical analysis for the residential that we're proposing to be sure that their noise levels inside are within acceptable levels, and for the proposed mechanical equipment. And finally, traffic we already talked about, but there were 3 mitigation measures related to those impacts, and that was to redesign some of the aisles in the parking area, as well as adding a stop sign to the Cherry Laurel Street intersection and turning on that signal at Holly Street and Laurel Street. We also included an assessment of alternatives. As I mentioned, we didn't find any significant and unavoidable impacts. Often you focus picking your alternatives on ones that will reduce or avoid those significant and unavoidable impacts, but we didn't have any here. So we picked 3 alternatives that would reduce even further the less than significant impacts that we already had. We took a look at a no project alternative, which was reuse the area as it is, reuse the currently empty buildings, and leave the rest unchanged. The next one is a no Cherry Street alternative, and that would remove the affordable housing component on Cherry Street. We included this one because Cherry Street, I believe, is still not under redevelopment agency control at the moment. So because that was a questionable component anyways, we wanted to take a look at the project without it. And finally, a reduced density alternative that would have a lower impact because it would have less residents on site, 1 less story. So what we found was that the impacts would be marginally reduced. They were already less than significant, so we are talking about a marginal reduction here. They'd be similar, but most of these alternatives would have a substantially reduced ability to meet objectives. So of course, a no project alternative, you avoid all your construction-related impacts. Those are temporary impacts, and like I said, they're already less than significant. So those were our conclusions with the alternatives. And with that, I'm open for any questions or comments.
Questions? We'll start with,
No, I have no questions.
okay. Commissioner Marsters?
Not at the not at the moment.
Okay. Commissioner Divney?
I don't have any at the moment.
Okay. We're ready to continue on? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. I only have one request to speak from Janet Jerome. Did I pronounce it correctly? Okay. So if anyone else would like to speak, please fill out one of these forms that are up at the table and hand it in. Yes, if you would please come up to the podium and state your name and address.
My name is Janet Jerome, and I live in the 600 block of Walnut Street. And the young lady who just spoke, I don't know how long I have to speak. 2 minutes is not going to be enough at all. First of all, she didn't mention anything about, one of the things is there's rodents. I live on Walnut Street in the 600 block. She mentioned nothing about, various rodents. There's a rodent problem there. She didn't mention anything about, the other area was a noise of construction. With construction noise, when, what was it? Bianchini's, but now Foodville, when they were there, they had trucks there, and I used to call here, I called the police. They have carte blanche when they bring in their trucks for food or for whatever they're doing, and it doesn't matter what time of the morning it is, so there's a definite noise problem for the residents. And what I wanted to also say is I'm totally opposed to this whole, whatever you want to call it, for Wheeler Plaza. I represent myself and I represent residents in this area on Walnut Street. I myself am a resident, of course. I also represent some of the business owners I've spoken with and some other concerned citizens about what this will do. Traffic-wise, San Carlos is getting more and more traffic. If you live here, you will know, or if you own a business, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And that Wheeler Plaza is loaded. And on the weekends, everything's loaded. You can't even find a parking place, hardly. That's number one. The increase in pollution, I don't believe a word what they're saying about the pollution. We already are exposed to a lot of pollution from the trucks, the vehicles alone, because of the increase in population here over these years. I've lived here all my life. What else? Let's see. Safety and, if something happens, how are you going to get the fire trucks? I mean, has that been really worked out? Safety and health for people if there's an emergency? You're just loading it up with more pollution, cars, traffic. And San Carlos is already overloaded at this point. So, that's basically all. And 108-unit condominium and all the things that they talk about that are supposed to be so beautiful, we don't see it happening. And we see that certain, like the person here who represents the builder, certain people will benefit, and a lot of us who are residents, we're not going to benefit from this at all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Please come up here. Thank you. Yes, please come up to the podium and state your name and address.
Hi, I'm Guy Latier, and I live down the street on Cherry Street. And I have a couple of concerns about the traffic specifically. First off, I've heard from several different people that have done the analysis that one of the solutions to traffic would be to help alleviate some of the congestion in the downtown would be to open up the Holly Laurel Street light, to make it a light instead of just a blinking light. And it seems a little bit ridiculous if we're not timed with El Camino to imagine that 150-foot to 200-foot stretch of street is going to allow people to turn toward El Camino if the light's green, say at the Holly Street, and it's red at El Camino for 3 or 4 other cycles. It's not going to let that traffic move. So I don't feel like that's really addressed it. And as I understand it, we don't really control El Camino's street lights. Those are state highways. I'm not sure if that's still true anymore. So we'd be trying to sync up with a state highway, and they'd have to sort of give preferential treatment to Holly Street over the flow of traffic on El Camino, which is not normally the way things are done. Secondly, with regard to traffic, I think the one oversight that I've seen several times and I mentioned is that the Cherry Walnut intersection is not mentioned as a four-way potential, and that seems ludicrous given the difficulty in coming out of the new parking garage, taking a left. I mean, you have two options. You can take a right to go toward Holly Street, or you can take a left to go toward Cherry Street. One goes north, one goes south, kind of. And when you get to the corner, if you haven't been through Walnut for a while, then you need to know that it's very difficult to go straight on Walnut, so you really have to turn left on Cherry. And my greatest concern is just the congestion in traffic, the pedestrians, especially the San Carlos Arms residents, who are not always as fleet of foot, and the kids that do ride their bikes from school and going to the downtown area. I just don't feel like we need to wait for an accident or for somebody to get hurt, and it's going to get really congested with this traffic. And I really concur with my previous speaker about the pollution and the noise and the increased traffic in that area. It's going to be much more difficult. And have I run out of time yet?
No, if you have other comments, you may continue.
And finally, I'd like to voice strongly that if any of this proceeds, and I understand that it's got a lot of virtue to it, but I firmly believe that the density that they're proposing for this maximized profit is really going to come at the expense of San Carlosians and not really benefit anyone that's going to be living in this area. So I don't know why we need to burst up 4 or 5, okay, whatever story you want to call it, 50 feet to maximize the density of residents in this proposed facility. And a lot of times they're saying, well, you're not going to see that because it's interior. But the one big selling point to the average citizen might be that courtyard that's going to exist at the present location of Foodville, where all of a sudden there's a big opening in the face of the building, and then you can see 4 or 5 stories that are going to exist up above there. So I don't think that, I know other buildings across the street perhaps have higher limits, but that doesn't mean that it was right to do that back at the time that it was done either. I mean, I think we need to build on the mistakes from the past. And so I also feel like the traffic analysis that was done, I'm sorry to go back to the traffic, but it's kind of my pet peeve. The traffic analysis that was done seemed to be done independently and separate. I know they took counts of cars that drove through different intersections and they made statements based on those facts, but it doesn't seem like it's connected to, well, this stretch of the street then connects to taking a left on Cherry, for example, off of Walnut, and then when that's all backed up to get onto across Laurel, then no one moves, and just come to any farmer's market on Thursday afternoon if you don't understand how that works. So, and right now it works great because everybody's very friendly and they're all in a good mood, but if you make this at 7:45 in the morning when people are trying to get on the go or kids are getting to school, as I said, I think it's going to impact our citizenry a lot more than the people that build the building. Thank you. I could go on.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, please come up.
Bonnie McClure, 128 North in San Carlos. As a citizen, I'm too concerned about density. However, ABAG has said that we have to have so many housing units, and I'd much rather see them put downtown so that people can walk to transit, whether they take the train or the bus, than out in the hills. And in order to get units, we would have to be splitting single family into multiple family dwellings out from the center of town. And then those people have to drive, and they'll be driving their cars downtown. and to get to the train station or out to 101. So we'll have more cars coming downtown. Whereas if the people are living right downtown, they don't need their car as much. Maybe they need a car on the weekend to go on a trip. But, and the other thing that I think the merchants might be overlooking is that if you have to get those 600 units out, spread out through the community, those people aren't going to be right there to go downtown and buy on Laurel Street. They're going to get in their car and they're going to go down to Stanford or Hillsdale. They're not going to bother to go downtown. Once you get in your car, there you go. So I think the merchants are missing a bet here. Here you have people right downtown where they can go to the restaurants, they can go to the food stores, they can go and buy a dress. And, you know, I think it's short-sighted. I think people aren't realizing that we're going to have to house people. And we don't want them driving in from Tracy. ABAG has given us a quota. We've got to meet it. So where are you going to put those people? We need them downtown. And this is a very good-looking project. And I wish that they would consider the future and whether you want a whole bunch of cars pouring down from the hills or if you have the people where they can go and shop locally. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Did anyone else have a comment?
Hello, my name is Laura Deck. I live at 224 Bayview Drive. I've been a San Carlos resident for almost 20 years. Probably my biggest concern with the project is the density. And I won't repeat everything that was said before, but I'm all in favor of doing modest improvements to the city. And I also should mention that I work, for the past 8 years, I've worked in the Hacienda business complex right on San Carlos Avenue and Elm Street. So I'm downtown a lot. It's just that reviewing the plans with the multi-story buildings facing San Carlos Avenue and Laurel Street, just the word overkill comes to mind. And like I said, I'm all in favor of modest, reasonable improvements to the city. But the level of density and the resulting traffic is a big concern to me. I've also noticed that the condominium complex, 1001 Laurel, still seems to have a fair amount of vacancy. It says that it's 75% occupied, but I'm guessing that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I would be concerned about introducing so many new residential units and having a vacancy rate. And in addition, if you haven't walked down Laurel Street, you'll notice that every other building is a restaurant. And I would be also very concerned with the level of competition with all the other restaurants and many of the other retail shops and merchants that are currently there. This would really bring an increased level of competition that could force some of the smaller restaurants out of business and show vacancy on Laurel Street, which I don't think is very attractive for the city. So mostly my concern is about the density. And I was pleased to see that one of the alternatives did have some of the existing virtues and benefits of the plan, but just at least a story lower. And I would hope that that could be, that alternative could be pursued or at least evaluated in further detail. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else here that would like to make a public comment? Yes, would you like to come back up to the podium, please? Yes, you do. We need to be able to record your comments, please.
So what I was wondering is, what about the issue of rodents? Does she have an answer for that? And also the noise about the construction, during construction. They can be here anytime in the morning to, follow through with the construction of this whole project. So we were just wondering, what does anybody, I'm addressing what she mentioned in her report this evening. So I'd like just get an answer on those two areas.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff have any information about the about either of those 2 points that we'd like to share with the public at this time?
So the first point was the rodents. So the environmental impact report is looking at the project's impact on the environment. Questions of rodents are usually more code enforcement issues. You're looking at restaurants that aren't keeping clean enough or houses that aren't well maintained. So no, that's not within the purview of the environmental analysis.
Okay, thank you.
If they were endangered rodents, then we would have taken a look at it. And the other point was?
Construction noise.
Construction noise.
Anything in your mitigation that would control that?
Yeah, that was identified as an impact in the environmental analysis and includes mitigation. It's impact noise-5 and mitigation measure noise-5. It requires construction noise control measures to be included in the construction plans for the project. There's a number of bullet points of what needs to be included, probably about 12 of them here. It's limiting the construction hours to between the hours of 7 a.m. and 6 p.m., constructing solid plywood fences around the construction site to shield receivers, equipping internal combustion engine driven equipment with intake and exhaust mufflers, prohibiting unnecessary idling, locating any stationary noise generating equipment such as air compressors or portable power generators as far as possible from sensitive receptors, and constructing temporary noise barriers around them, using quiet air compressors and other stationary noise source technology where it exists, routing all construction traffic to and from the project area via designated truck routes, and prohibit construction-related heavy truck traffic in residential areas wherever feasible. There's more. I don't know that I need to read them all aloud. I just reference that.
Okay. So thank you.
Those are recommendations, those aren't requirements.
It is a
To
mitigation measure.
To mitigate.
It's the following standard construction noise control measures shall be included in the construction plans
Okay,
for the
all right,
project.
yeah. It's the basic stuff we already do.
And just to clarify the construction hours, I think Ms. Gorton indicated 7 a.m. It's actually 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Yes, to
Okay.
6 p.m. And what the speaker referenced, I believe the municipal code has some exemption for delivery vehicles, and that would not apply to this construction situation, so they would be limited to the construction hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. It's also pretty common with demolition projects for the demolition contractor to kind of have a rodent control plan. I don't know that this project in particular would have a high situation for that. Usually, if you have more IV or something, but we could certainly require that as a condition of approval.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Okay, thank you. So given what you've heard now, then, do you have other questions or statements, comments that you would like to make to put on the record for this hearing?
For the record, regarding the noise, they were there much earlier. Those trucks that came into Foodville, they were there at 5 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning. They were opening and closing their doors. I would call the police department. I called where I live, where I happen to live, and there's nothing they can do about it. There's no regulation. They say 7 o'clock, but that is just not true. And I know people, I don't represent just myself. There are citizens, and some of these citizens are retired. And they informed me that, it wakes them up. You're retired and, you're on Walnut Street. Well, good luck. And they were glad when Foodville left. They were real glad. And, there's a large group of people who are really against this whole project. And regarding the rodents, there is an issue with ants and rodents on the area of Walnut Street. I know somebody who lives at, the condominium there. They're having trouble with rodents and ants. So, there is a definite problem with that. And when you're removing, 50-year-old buildings, there is an issue. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your additional comments. Okay, was there anyone else here who wanted to comment? You need to You need to come up to the podium, and I need you to fill out a form so we have a record of you speaking, please.
You can just tell them it's Wheeler Plaza.
It's Wheeler. We,
Just,
Just tell them it's Wheeler Plaza.
hey,
okay, when you say tell them, tell who?
The man who asked the question.
The item we're discussing on the agenda is the Wheeler Plaza development,
Oh,
and
I'm sorry. I thought
specifically,
you
we're
meant- okay.
discussing the draft environmental impact report.
Okay. Brian Randall, San Carlos. I'm sorry I don't come to these meetings. I don't know how to quite address you properly. So it'll be ladies and gentlemen if that's okay.
That's fine.
Thank you. My concern with Wheeler Plaza has always been, looking at it from a fireman's point of view, I'm very familiar with that, is the access. I said this in the first meetings regarding Wheeler Plaza, which was many years ago, and in two of the recent meetings. I believe that you should be able to get a ladder truck in from each side. I see in the plans that there is a wooden structure over the top at one end, which I would imagine is trellis work. That would prevent you getting a ladder truck in at that end. And once again, I want to express my concern that you can get those big vehicles in at either end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if you would please fill out one of the forms so we have that as a record. Okay. Anyone else that has a comment they would like to make before we close the public portion of the hearing? No. Okay. Do I have a motion?
Move to close.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Discussion. Commissioner Dibney. No, Commissioner Dibney. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of my own points that I want to say. Commissioner Sanfilippo.
I actually kind of talked about this last week, and it's really about the traffic stuff, which I believe is currently on the table already. So, we talking about again doesn't make any sense at this moment. So I really don't have any other comments.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Marsters?
Just a couple.
Yeah, just a couple. The first item, I sent a whole list of items to staff to address, so I'm not going to go over those. I'm just going to go over a couple of the new things that I heard from the public. The first is noise from delivery trucks. It seems to me like the fact that if you build a building and the delivery trucks are now coming in behind that building, the residents on Walnut Street will actually hear less of the delivery noise than they do right now, because the building that's going to be built will actually block the noise from the residents on Walnut Street, or at least one would hope that is what's going to happen. The other thing that I heard were several comments and concerns about density, and I just wanted to hear from staff, maybe Al or Mark, about whether there were other ideas on density, whether there are potential for additional setbacks on other floors. I don't know if any of that was considered at all.
Well, from a density standpoint, the density that was established in the general plan was 50 dwelling units to the acre, and I believe this is just under that, or right at it. So it's in conformance with the general plan, and density for the downtown area and the areas surrounding the downtown were a very in-depth discussion item when the general plan was completed and through the general plan community process. So the densities were carefully considered in and around downtown. That being said, part of the density that you decide to do is, one, the general plan, what's allowed, and you don't want to go over what the maximum level is, but two, the economies of the project and the economic and fiscal, realities of it. The more density you have, the more fiscally or economically viable the project is. Some of the things that the city wanted and that we heard from the community were more parking, public plaza, and other amenities for the project. And also, because there's structured parking associated with the project, and the type of construction it is, and to make it look really nice, it's going to cost more than maybe a typical condominium project would cost. So those are some of the factors that were considered. So again, the more units that you can sell, the more the project pays for itself. So that was a consideration. We looked at less units in the very beginning. Before we even brought this project forward, what we did is we tried to figure out if it penciled from an economic standpoint. No one's going to want to build any project unless there's some kind of a positive land residual or you make some kind of a profit. It just doesn't make any sense, even for the city, to put in its own redevelopment dollars or general fund dollars or dedicate land. So that was one of the first things we did. We looked at, well, what is the least density you could do? What is, if you put more density, what other benefits would you get? So we looked at a range of density alternatives and came up with a density that penciled out from an economic standpoint and also conformed to the maximum density range that was established in the general plan. One of the other things was mentioned was setbacks, and whenever you set back a part of the building, that will reduce the floor plate inside the building, and you will change the configuration of the unit. You'll reduce a unit in size. You may eliminate units. However, on the San Carlos and Walnut side of the development, what we heard is the most people were most sensitive about this area of the building in terms of how it appeared. It was the most visible from a community standpoint on San Carlos Avenue. And so the height of the building was lowered there to 3 stories in that location from 4 stories in those units, because we couldn't really lose any units in density from a cost, again, an economics perspective. Those units were then moved to another location along Walnut Street. So what basically the bottom line is, yeah, we looked at the units, we looked very carefully at the economics of the project, and we looked at the general plan density, and we tried to get a balance along with the aesthetics of the project. And so that's a long-winded answer.
Can you address sort of the concern that to some people it's going to look like it's actually 4 stories along, say, San Carlos Avenue, but you're sort of saying it's 3 stories. How would you address that?
Well, people address it in different ways. I would say that it's a 3-story building of 40 feet. Because it is literally, if you're talking about stories, it's literally 3 stories. There's 1 floor of retail and then 2 floors of residential, as you can see along the left side of the screen there. The reason that it's 40 feet instead of something lower is a couple of things. One is for Class A retail space, the marketplace demands a height of in the range of 16 feet for a ceiling floor plate to make it really good Class A retail space that's going to rent out in the marketplace. And we've consulted with real estate experts in the real estate market field to make sure of that. And so one of the downfalls of these types of projects is that the retail space isn't planned well, and it's not planned and the marketplace isn't consulted, before these things are designed. So some of these mixed-use projects you see throughout the Bay Area, they don't rent for months or even years because they weren't planned right in the first place. So one of the things we were very careful about is that first floor, and so that's why you have a higher, it's actually a 20-foot floor plate on the ground floor, approximately a 20-foot floor plate, to add flexibility and, again, to answer to the marketplace demands for that, to get real high-quality space there. The upper floors, you have a floor plate, for condos to make them marketable and to make it work from you want a decent ceiling height. An 8-foot ceiling height feels cramped inside, so you want at least 9 to 10 feet in ceiling height on the interior of a condominium to make it desirable. Also, there's a foot or two between, a couple of feet, 18 inches to 2 feet between floors for all the floor plate and the utilities that go in between the floors. So that's why I would say this is a 4-story building with a 40-foot height. People say that it's 4 stories because the bottom floor has 20 feet. So it's somewhat a semantic thing, but I'm going to choose to call it a 4-story building. 3-story building, that's what it is.
And then the last thing that I heard was a concern that we were building this to meet ABAG requirements for us to build a certain amount of housing. My impression is that the ABAG are really recommendations and that we're not necessarily required to build that housing.
Yes, I think that's a fair assessment. The ABAG requires us, they say they require us to build, it's called Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and they give us a number every few years, and they say this is the number you have to reach from an affordable housing standpoint in your community. You have to share affordable housing with all the other cities in the region, make it fair for everybody. Everybody's got to do a little bit to make it work. So yes, they do give us a number. They don't say that if you don't reach this number, there's no penalties necessarily at this time. It's sort of, it's a mandate, but there's no real penalties. However, you need to show that you're making a good faith effort. In this case, it is a good thing in terms of our below market rate, the goals that we're trying to meet. It does get us closer to the number that they've established for us to meet our below market housing needs. And so from that standpoint, it's a consideration. It wasn't one of the main considerations, I think, when we were putting this together. On the other hand, we also have our own local ordinances for below market housing, and this fits into our below market rate housing ordinance in terms of the percentage of below market rate houses that are being added here.
If I could just add a comment, I did attend the last ABAG planning meeting, and they talked about if you were unable to build the housing in the planning period, those units would carry over into the amount you're required to show in the next period. So there is a concern that if we don't build and show our fair share of affordable housing construction, affordable and market rate, that we're then going to need to show in the next housing element cycle even more units, which is going to be problematic.
And how many affordable units are part of this project?
38, wasn't it? 38?
Because I've heard different numbers. I just want to hear a number.
The current proposal is that there would be 8 within the. Can you hear me? 8 within the project, and that the development would pay an in lieu fee, which is allowed under our below market rate ordinance, and then those dollars could be used to produce other units elsewhere, and that was the Cherry Street affordable concept that's also included in the EIR, was to actually produce more affordable housing as a result of doing it that way than having them included within the development.
Can I get a point of clarification? We keep using the word affordable and below market. Are they two different things?
They're interchangeable.
So they're the same thing, just a different way of saying it. Because if you look at this I'm looking at 3-2, there's supposed to be 38 affordable units. So are you saying they're going to,
So eight,
they're going to pay an in lieu fee for the other 30 units?
the
Unless I'm not reading
below
that right.
market rate ordinance requires 15% affordable units, and it's those 15% that would generate the in lieu fee, which is estimated to be, I think, about $3 million.
Okay.
And then with that money, you would do a separate project where you could actually leverage state and federal dollars and create even more units than would otherwise have been produced.
Yeah, and if I can also clarify, the environmental impact report, although we're calling it the Wheeler Plaza Development Project, and we're really focusing on the project that we have defined at this point, it does include the Foodville development of a restaurant with the plaza, and it also includes the affordable housing component, which hasn't really been fleshed out and designed at this point.
Right.
But we wanted to analyze that all in this one document so that we know all the environmental impacts at one point.
And that's where the confusion in the numbers comes from.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Dibney.
Hi.
Number 2, Commissioner
My
Dibney. Yes.
concerns have been brought out in the last meeting. They're all regarding traffic.
Okay, good. Commissioner Harper Pedersen.
Just one thing about traffic, which I know we spoke about the last meeting. I think an important point that was raised in public comment is, does the traffic analysis take into account the intersections that are a few intersections down from what was studied? And I guess that's just a question I have.
I can give you a brief answer, and we can respond a little bit better in the final EIR. But the short of it is that they did look at queuing at the intersections that they took a look at and did a full analysis of that to make sure that it was all within the bounds of the capacity for queuing. So that was taken a look at, yeah.
Thank you. And then, I'm sorry, just one more thing, Karen.
Please.
And then I thought we'd mentioned earlier, we can make hours and deliveries a condition of the project, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't have a
And then
project yet.
deal with the separate enforcement issue if that's not enforced. Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Can we limit the hours and deliveries for one particular project, or is there sort of a citywide, isn't that part of a citywide ordinance?
You know, I don't think that we have an ordinance for citywide business deliveries. It really is on a project-by-project basis. We have noise ordinances that are sort of more general,
Right.
that kind of thing. For instance, with there was a local fast food place recently that will go unnamed, but we had some concerns about deliveries with that project, and we worked with them to limit the hours or control the hours to where it was acceptable to the local neighborhood. So, but it's always good to pre-plan for that, and it's okay to put conditions in on a project-by-project basis.
Okay. I have some questions, or I want to make sure that in the final EIR that how the noise issues are being covered. So I understand that the concept of that this building might shelter some of that noise in the alleyway from the delivery trucks, but I'm concerned, how was there any modeling that took into account then the resulting noise for those units that are on the back of the building along the alley? And perhaps you could address a little bit how that the modeling was done.
Yeah, so as far as the noise modeling that was taken into account, I think the short of it is that the noise levels, because of things like the delivery activities and having that active area back there as well as the roadways, they're going to be a little bit high for those residents. So the mitigation that we've included is to do design-specific analysis to make sure that the way that the units are designed, they will dampen the noise coming from the outside. So it'll be things like having double pane noise reducing windows and facing them in the proper direction and in the proper locations.
Okay. What about any mitigating measures for other existing buildings in the area now that the ambient noise level is going to be higher. So let's say across the street and some of the higher units in the Hacienda development. How's that taken into?
Sure. So the focus of the environmental analysis is on what impact this project is creating. So it's not specifically mitigating any existing situation. As someone else has brought up, the building itself would actually act as a buffer for some of the units on Walnut from the existing noise. But it does not propose to provide any mitigation to existing units elsewhere for existing noise concerns.
Okay. So then looking at how the modeling was done, looking at those courtyards that are available to the residents and how voices, people using that outdoor space, the residents and their guests using those outdoor spaces, how was that included in the noise modeling?
I don't have my noise modelers here with me, so we might have to respond to that in the final EIR.
I guess I would like to know that it has been included, or that there is, is there some way to mitigate those kinds of noise, since they tend to be more disruptive to people in adjacent existing buildings?
Right, and I would have to look specifically in this analysis, but my understanding from many projects that I've worked on is that the sound of a human voice is not actually that loud, and particularly when you're talking about an environment like this where you have a lot of urban noises around, it wouldn't necessarily carry that far. But we can double check with our noise modelers and get a real answer into the final EIR.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I have just a question. This is more just general knowledge related. The next to the Wells Fargo Bank, there's that strip of land, the parking area. Is that owned by the same owner of the Wells Fargo Bank property? Okay. And so what is the plan for using that parking strip? Are we still going to be encouraging the public to drive through that alleyway to go into that parking area and be able to go through it? Or are there some other thoughts long-term of how to then have that alleyway be primarily for delivery trucks? Because there's no access into the general public parking.
I'm confused, Karen. Are you talking about the one between Co-America and Wells Fargo?
Yes, that one.
Well, delivery trucks are coming on the other side.
90 degrees
You're speaking of this
right,
parking
and I'm
area
just figuring
here.
out how is this going to function in the bigger scheme of things?
Right, so vehicles would be able to come in off of Cherry to access that private parking area, and it would also be for any vehicle that needed to access the rear of any of the businesses would also be able to use this area, and then they could head straight out to San Carlos Avenue.
So what about the title there that says truck entry only?
Yeah, so I think to kind of make a slight correction to that, the service alley is really intended only for service vehicles during certain times of the day, so that the access to that parking area, we'll need to work that out. And I think we'll have to take a look at that and answer that question. It's a good question. Maybe, we can have some signage and try and, allow access to that driveway, but then say you have to make a right and you can only use that driveway, but you can't exit out onto San Carlos Avenue. So we'll have to figure that out with our traffic engineers.
It just doesn't seem like it fits with with the flow that we're putting in there, that we're not allowing for any access from Laurel through that area into the parking garage.
Well, they don't go that way now. It's a
I know,
one-way.
but I'm thinking maybe it would make sense for them
It's
to
only
do
one
that.
way. If you see the parking the way it's
pointed towards.
it's pointed, the way it's accessed now is only from the
You
rear.
can turn it around.
No, I'm just-
and go-
As
yeah,
far as
but-
yeah, that's
The
right.
flow here, Karen.
You can't go
I know
both
what
ways.
it is now.
It's an exit only.
I'm looking for the future. I'm trying to put, good mojo on this that'll really happen, and thinking through all the little nitty-gritty details. So I guess that was just, I was just curious about that. Because building on a comment from our previous meeting that was made about that whole delivery area becoming a pedestrian area. To me, it's
Right.
it's a little too jumbled up right now, and I can see that becoming a really great pedestrian area, and that it needs to be attractive. Otherwise, it's just going to be this kind of noisy, dark alley area. And I think that access there across that property that Wells Fargo is on could be significant from a design point of view. So I just wanted to put that out there. And those are the only things that I have on my comment list.
And if I could just comment, that discussion just gave me an idea on how to control the traffic is what we've talked about in the past is, and what they do in San Francisco, in some areas of San Francisco, around Union Square, for instance, they have alleys where in the morning there's the delivery trucks, and there's even restaurants in the alleys and access to some of the retail businesses around Union Square, for instance. And they put bollards after the service hours so that you can't go through there. And then they open it up, and they put their chairs and tables out there, and you can have lunch and listen to opera in the alley. And so this conversation gave me an idea that to allow for access to the driveway there, we would then install bollards at the end of the driveway to still allow access from Cherry, and then they could still access Laurel Street, but then they couldn't go through because there would be bollards there at a certain time of day. Same thing at the other end. Perhaps, maybe if we did it there, we wouldn't need to do it anywhere else. But that is the intent, is that alley could become a place like we see up in San Francisco, where we could use some really good materials on the ground and use some vertical landscaping and maybe water features or other features that could make it a more of a urban, alley, plaza, usable space. And so that's been our idea from the beginning. And Mark, I think Mark had an idea you want to share?
I was just going to add that another alternative would be to, for Wells Fargo, that they could have some dedicated spaces right there on the ground floor in the parking structure, and that what is now currently a drive-through and parking spot could be another landscaped walkway to get to the parking garage, and make it more presentable and inviting for people to come from back and forth between the parking structure and Laurel.
So never to be used by cars.
And
I understand moving the
correct
parking.
Correct.
Okay.
That's also right where there's a walkway across Laurel Street right in the middle of the block there too.
Pedestrian crossing.
It's mid-block.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments the commissioners want to share before we move off this topic? Okay.
Nope.
Very good. Then, thank you to everyone that's here for your comments. We're now going to move to the next items on the agenda. Reports, correspondence, and general information. Report on recent city council actions.
I don't have any report.
Okay. Could I expand that to include the EDAC, since Mark is here? They met this afternoon, right?
Correct.
Did EDAC meet this afternoon?
They did.
I was just wondering if you might be able to share with us some of the information about the redevelopment, that if it would be appropriate at this point in time, or it might be better to put on the agenda some other time, but since you were here, I thought I would just ask.
EDAC held a general discussion on economic development in the post-redevelopment world. They did actually center a lot of their comments on the Wheeler Plaza project and what it would take to make it go forward. There aren't any definitive answers to either of those questions, so it was really just a study session and a general discussion about what ideas staff has, what ideas that the EDAC has for going forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Planning Commission comments or reports?
I have none.
None.
Okay, I have a couple of things. One thing, I met with Mayor Klein last week and just had kind of a brief conversation about what was coming up on the agenda in the future for the Planning Commission, and what had things that had taken place in the past and just kind of had a good opportunity to get to know one another a little bit better and share some information. So that was very helpful. I also wanted to check with the other commissioners to see if you would be willing to try something different in terms of our seating arrangements for the next meeting. Unless it's somewhere in a city ordinance that I don't know about, that I would like to sit at one end or the other, so I don't have to keep going back and, no. It's not that I don't want to go back and forth, but I found that it worked really well at the last meeting when all the transportation folks were over here and all of the planning commission was here, for me to be able to see all four people at one time, see who's smiling and who's grimacing, instead of having to swing back and forth. So I was interested in trying that. If you guys would be interested in doing that, I'd like to hear your point of view. So.
I think that's a great idea, Karen.
Can I try that?
You made my day today.
Will you humor me with that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. So if
I want to be on this end, so I can read, so I can see.
Okay. I'll be down at that end if that's okay. Does staff have any concerns about that?
No, that
Okay.
sounds fine.
All right. Thank you very much for indulging me in that. Okay. We'll move on. Correspondence.
No correspondence?
Okay. Any planning staff comments, reports, or updates of other current projects or information about what's coming up on future agendas?
Just to report that we do have the League of California Cities Planning Conference and mini workshop. The deadline to register for that is coming up, so please let us know if you would like to register. We do have money in the budget for the registration and expenses, but not for any hotel-related expenses. It is in San Jose, so it shouldn't be necessary. Yes. Fairmont Hotel in San Jose. March 20th through 22nd. Registration's February 22nd, so please let us know.
And what does the upcoming schedule for March meetings look like? How's the crystal ball shaping up?
Well, for your March meeting, we have a lovely agenda planned for you that evening with the consideration of the final Wheeler EIR as well as the Carlos Club.
Oh, awesome.
Very nice. So we have reached out to the acoustical consultants, and if the applicant will agree to reimburse quickly, we should be able to stay on schedule with that item.
Okay, great. Can I order 2 pitchers of water for that meeting, please? Okay. Anyone have anything else? Okay, the meeting's adjourned.